Okay, so you guys really wanted this one a deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye, and more specifically, Holden Caulfield.
Yeah, we're diving into those first few chapters where Holden makes his dramatic exit from Pensy Prep.
It's those awkward encounters, those little moments that really give us a glimpse into what makes Holden tick,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And we've got all those key scenes lined up for you. His departure, the tense visit with Mr. Spencer, the whole Stradlater and Ackley situation,
Yeah.
the train ride to New York. It's going to be a packed deep dive.
We're not just recapping the plot here, though, right? We want to dig into what's going on in Holden's head.
His state of mind, his relationships, the unique way he views the world, it's all there in those early chapters.
If you really want to grasp what Salinger's doing with this iconic character, this is where it starts. So let's jump right in with Holden leaving Pensy. What always strikes me is how much he focuses on goodbyes, or rather, his inability to say them properly.
It's like this visceral thing with him, right? He even says leaving without acknowledging it makes him feel worse.
Like he needs that closure, that mental check mark to actually process the experience.
Could it be about control? Maybe. In a life that's spiraling out of control, he needs to frame these moments his way.
Interesting. And then there's that memory he has out of nowhere throwing a football with those other guys right before dinner.
And getting chewed out by Mr. Zambezi for it. I love how that random scene becomes his way of saying goodbye to Pensy.
It's like the official leaving, packing up, walking away. That doesn't do it for him. But this fleeting memory of a simple connection, that's what resonates.
Maybe it's the genuine, unscripted moments that feel real to Holden, even in his memories.
Makes you think. And then he's off practically running to Mr. Spencer's place. He mentions being out of breath so easily from all that smoking, which he's supposed to quit, and that crazy growth spurt. He's a mess.
It's that awkward in-between stage of adolescence.
Right.
It's changing so fast physically and emotionally, and neither seems to fit quite right.
And the journey to Mr. Spencer's is pretty bleak, too. All icy. He almost wipes out. And then there's that thing about disappearing when he crosses streets.
Yeah, that's intense, that feeling of disappearing. Like he's not fully anchored in himself, you know? And the whole cold, isolating environment just mirrors that internal detachment.
He gets to Mr. Spencer's and bam. First person he sees is Mrs. Spencer. She can barely hear, and she already knows about the expulsion. Talk about awkward.
It's almost symbolic, right? The older generation not quite hearing or understanding what the younger one is going through. And Holden's lost control of his narrative before he even gets a chance.
So the conversation with Mr. Spencer starts, and it's clear Holden's avoiding the real reasons for getting kicked out. He goes on this whole rant about the phonies at Elkton Hills,
Yeah.
Mr. Haas, the headmaster.
That's classic Holden, right? Immediately jumping to the phoniness of it all.
Yeah.
Haas's fake charm, the way he treats parents based on their status. It's also surface level.
And it drives Holden crazy. He wants something real authentic, and he just doesn't see it in these institutions.
He sees through the facade. He can't stand it.
He even admits to having a few qualms about leaving Pensy, but he hasn't felt it yet. Like
Yeah.
he's emotionally numb.
It's that delayed reaction. Teens do that, right? They understand it intellectually, but the feeling hasn't caught up yet.
And his focus is just on getting home on Wednesday. Like he's pushing it all away.
Anything to avoid dealing with it head on.
Mr. Spencer, bless his heart, tries to talk to Holden about his future. And Holden is just totally dismissive, like they're on different planets.
On opposite sides of the pole, as he puts it.
Yeah.
It's that generational divide. Mr. Spencer represents that old school view of education and success.
And Holden is just so disillusioned by it all, he can't even relate.
He's searching for something more, something with meaning, and he doesn't see it in what Mr. Spencer's offering.
There's this moment where Mr. Spencer keeps trying to toss Holden's exam paper onto the bed and missing. It's almost comical, but it just emphasizes how much they're not connecting.
Yeah, like a visual representation of their disconnect. Even physically, Mr. Spencer can't quite reach him.
And to escape, Holden makes up this excuse about getting his equipment from the gym. Total lie. And as he leaves, Mr. Spencer yells, "Good luck," which just makes Holden cringe.
Why do you think that is? I mean, good luck seems harmless enough, right?
But for Holden, it's probably just another empty phrase, like a meaningless platitude. He's failed, he feels misunderstood, and that good luck probably rings totally hollow.
It's like he's yearning for something more than just a pat on the back and a generic well-wishing.
Let's shift gears a bit and look at Holden's actual life at Pensy before the whole expulsion thing. He talks about his room being in the Austenberger Memorial Wing,
Yeah.
named after that super rich guy in the funeral business.
Oh, yeah, the phony undertaker, as Holden sees him.
Ah,
And that story about Ausenberger's speech in chapel.
don't even get me started. The fart heard round Pensy.
It's brilliant, though, right? It sums up Holden's disgust for superficiality, the supposedly devout guy undercut by something so ridiculously human.
It's that unexpected humor that undercuts the pompousness. It's got to resonate with Holden for sure.
Yeah, he sees the hypocrisy and absurdity of it all.
Back in his room, he finds comfort in the heat and immediately puts on his red hunting hat, peaked to the back. Of course.
That hat is like his trademark, right? It's not just about keeping warm, it's a statement. It's his way of standing out, or maybe hiding in plain sight.
In a world full of phonies, he's clinging to something that feels authentically him.
Absolutely. It's his armor against conformity.
Then he's reading Out of Africa, which he got by mistake but actually liked. He talks about preferring books that make him wish he knew the author. Like he's searching for connection, even in literature.
It's not just about entertainment for him. It's about finding a voice that speaks to him directly, that resonates with his own experiences.
That longing for genuine connection is so central to Holden's character, and it's just not happening for him at Pensy.
He's surrounded by people, but he feels so alone.
Speaking of people, let's talk about those roommates, Ackley and Stradlater. What a pair.
Talk about opposite to Ackley, that intrusive, annoying guy with the terrible hygiene.
Holden can barely stand him, but he tolerates him. Where do you think that is?
I think it speaks to Holden's loneliness. He needs some form of human contact, even if it's with someone who drives him nuts.
It's like he's so desperate for connection that even Ackley's weirdness is better than being completely alone.
It's sad kind of companionship.
And then there's Stradlater, the opposite of Ackley in so many ways. Good-looking, popular, always preening over himself.
He's the epitome of that superficial charm that Holden both admires and despises. He's got that effortless confidence that Holden craves, but also sees right through.
And then the bomb drops. Stradlater's going on a date with Jane Gallagher, and Holden completely loses it.
Jane, the girl who lived next door the summer before, the one he has all these memories of playing checkers with.
It's like she holds this special place in Holden's heart, this pure, untainted connection from a simpler time.
And now she's going out with Stradlater, the guy Holden fundamentally distrusts. It's a recipe for disaster.
He bombards Stradlater with questions about Jane, remembers every little detail about her, even how she never moved her kings in checkers.
Those small details are everything to Holden. They represent a genuine connection, something he's searching for in his present life.
But Stradlater is clueless. He just wants the sexy stuff about Jane's stepfather. It's clear he doesn't get it, and it disgusts Holden.
It's that clash of values again. Stradlater sees Jane as a conquest. Holden sees her as someone to protect.
And despite all this, Holden agrees to write that composition for Stradlater, and what does he do? He writes about Allie's baseball glove.
It's such a powerful move. It's a silent rebellion against Stradlater's shallow expectations and a way for Holden to hold on to his grief for Allie.
That glove with the poems written all over it, it's a symbol of everything Holden's lost, that innocence, that pure love.
And it's something Stradlater can never understand.
Then we have that depressing Saturday night dinner. Dry steak, lumpy mashed potatoes, brown Betty Ackley snoring through the shower curtain. Talk about a mood killer.
Even the food at Pensy is phony and disappointing. It's like a reflection of Holden's overall disillusionment with the place.
It's bleakness on a plate.
Definitely not a gourmet experience.
And then Stradlater gets back from his date with Jane and refuses to tell Holden anything. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Holden's imagination is running wild. He knows Stradlater's reputation. He's terrified of what might have happened.
That protectiveness towards Jane is so intense. He sees her as vulnerable, and he can't stand the thought of Stradlater taking advantage.
And it all stems from his own deep affection for her, the depth of which he probably doesn't even fully understand himself.
Finally, Stradlater looks at the composition and flips out. He calls Holden back-ass words, blames his thinking for his failing grades. He's totally missed the point.
He can't see the emotional significance of that glove. It's just another assignment to him. And it infuriates Holden.
It's that disconnect again. Stradlater represents everything that's wrong with the system in Holden's eyes. The focus on the superficial, the lack of empathy.
It's all about following the rules, hitting the marks. And there's no space for genuine emotion or personal meaning.
Holden tears up the composition, and of course they end up fighting. Holden ends up with a bloody nose. It's an explosion of all that pent-up frustration.
It's like he can't express himself any other way. He's so angry and hurt, and the only outlet he finds is physical violence.
It's a desperate act, a cry for help that nobody hears.
Sadly.
So he goes to Ackley's room, bleeding battered. And Ackley's biggest concern is that he's been woken up. Talk about adding insult to injury.
Even in this moment of vulnerability, Holden can't find any comfort or support. He's completely isolated.
It's like he's surrounded by people, but totally alone.
It's a heartbreaking realization for someone his age, to feel so unseen, so unheard.
He asks to sleep in Eli's bed since Eli is away, and Ackley's like, ah, fine. Holden's sarcastic thanks just emphasizes how hollow it all is.
He's grasping at straws, trying to find some human connection, even if it's just a place to crash for the night.
And then the kicker, Ackley doesn't even have any cigarettes. Like, that's the final blow.
It's a small detail, but for Holden in that moment, it probably feels like the universe is against him.
He even says he wishes he was dead. It's a dark moment, a glimpse into how deep his despair runs.
It's a cry from the abyss, a moment of utter hopelessness.
And then to make matters worse, or maybe just to fill the silence, he tells Ackley this ridiculous lie about the fight being about defending Ackley's honor.
It's a desperate attempt at connection, however absurd. It's like he's trying to create a bond out of thin air.
He needs something to bridge that gap, even if it's a complete fabrication.
It's a defense mechanism, a way of masking his pain with humor and absurdity.
So he lies down in Ely's bed, and his mind is racing thoughts about Jane Stradlater's, memories of Stradlater's technique with girls from a previous double date. It's all swirling around in his head.
He's consumed by anxiety and disgust. His idealized vision of Jane is clashing with the reality of Stradlater, and he can't reconcile the two.
It's like he's trapped in a nightmare.
And he can't escape.
He can't sleep. And out of nowhere, he asks Ackley about joining a monastery. It's so random, so Holden.
It's that impulsive escapist side of him coming out. He's desperate for a way out of this world he hates, a place where he could find peace and meaning.
But of course, Ackley completely misses the point. He's all about his own religious beliefs and totally oblivious to Holden's emotional state.
It's the final straw for Holden. He realizes he can't find what he's looking for here. He has to go.
So he packs up in a frenzy, and the sight of those brand new ice skates his mom got him, it just makes him more depressed.
Those ice skates are a symbol of his complicated relationship with his family. They're a gift of love, but they also represent a world he feels disconnected from.
It's like he can't even appreciate a simple gesture of kindness. He's too wrapped up in his own pain.
He's pushing everyone away, even those who care about him.
He counts his money, realizes he's practically broke, so he sells his typewriter to Frederick Woodruff for next to nothing.
It's a desperate move, a sign of how impulsive and reckless he's become. He's not thinking about consequences.
He's just trying to survive.
One moment at a time.
He takes one last look down the corridor, feels like he's gonna cry, puts on his red hunting hat and yells, "Sleep tight, ya morons!"
That's our Holden. A mix of anger, defiance, and sadness. He's leaving Pensy behind, but he's not escaping his problems.
He's just trading one set of anxieties for another.
He's on the run, but he has nowhere to go.
The walk to the train station is cold and miserable. His suitcases are banging against his legs. He washes his bloody face with snow. It's a harsh reality check.
The physical world mirrors his emotional state. It's cold and unforgiving.
And those physical wounds are a reminder of the violence and turmoil he's carrying with him.
He can't leave that behind.
On the train, he meets Mrs. Morrow, Ernest Morrow's mother. And wouldn't you know it, Holden launches into this elaborate lie about Ernest.
The lies just flow out of him, don't they? It's like a reflex. He can't help himself.
He paints this picture of Ernest as this shy, modest intellectual, the complete opposite of the real Ernest. Why do you think he does that?
It's about control, maybe. He can't control his own life, but he can control the story he tells Mrs. Morrow.
It's also a way of avoiding a real conversation. He's uncomfortable with honesty, with vulnerability, so he hides behind these fabrications.
And he gets a kick out of it, too, right? There's a sense of amusement in his deception.
He even changes his own name, calls himself Rudolf Schmidt, like he's shedding his identity along with the truth.
It's like he's trying on different personas, trying to figure out who he is or who he wants to be.
And then he really goes off the rails, tells Mrs. Morrow he's leaving Pensy because of a brain tumor, that he's going to South America with his grandmother. It's absurd.
But Mrs. Morrow buys it. She's charmed by him, concerned, even invites him to visit.
It's almost like a commentary on how easily we believe what we want to believe, especially when it's a good story.
And it's ironic, right? Holden hates phonies, but he's being the biggest phony of them all.
It makes you wonder if his constant lying is more than just a defense mechanism, if it's become an ingrained part of who he is.
It's a fascinating question, and it gets at the heart of Holden's character. Is he fundamentally dishonest? Or is he just trying to survive in a world that feels fake?
So these early chapters of The Catcher in the Rye, they really lay the foundation for everything that comes after.
It's all there. Holden's alienation, his obsession with phoniness, his struggle to connect his deep-seated grief over Allie.
It's like Salinger's giving us a map of Holden's psyche.
And it's a map that leads us through some pretty dark and twisted terrain.
These excerpts, They raise some big questions about adolescence, about loss, about the search for authenticity in a world that often feels phony.
And they force us to confront those same questions in our own lives. What are those small moments that carry huge weight for us? What are the things we cling to when everything else feels fake?
What are those seemingly insignificant details that define who we are and how we see the world?
It's something to think about, right? Those little things that make up a life. A memory, a gesture, a red hunting hat.
Sometimes the most profound truths are hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the seemingly insignificant details that tell the biggest story.
And that's what The Catcher in the Rye is all about. It's a deep dive into the human experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And it all starts with Holden Caulfield's messy, chaotic departure from Pensy Prep.
It's a journey that takes us to some dark places, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Because in Holden's struggles, we see reflections of our own.
And maybe, just maybe, we can find some solace in knowing that we're not alone in our search for authenticity, for connection, for something real in a world that often feels fake.
And sometimes that search starts with a simple question. What are the things that make us feel truly alive? What are the things that make us want to shout, sleep tight, ya morons, to the world?
Food for thought, right?
Definitely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Catcher in the Rye.
Until next time, keep searching, keep questioning, and keep those red hunting hats handy.